Very pleased to be joined by Jorge Sedano, ESPN Los Angeles, ESPN NBA, all over their coverage. Good enough to join us for a couple of minutes here. George, it's a pleasure, man. How are you?
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
It's our pleasure. I want to start big picture, then go nuanced. If I asked you right now, with a couple of weeks left in the regular season, what's your opinion, impression of the New Orleans Pelicans? How do you describe this team?
I would call them frisky in the playoffs. I feel like they're one of those teams that you probably don't want to see because it's going to end up being one of those long, dragged-out series. And I feel like what we've seen from Zion most recently is, well, sans the Miami game where he didn't play well, although the team kicked the crap out of Miami.
Right.
I feel like we're getting the Zion, to J.J. Redick's point, my colleague, that we expected to see a couple of years ago, that we only saw in small doses. And they've got this power player in Zion. When Brandon is healthy, which, in theory he should be here hopefully sooner rather than later, they've got this dynamic wing player. They've got a veteran guard like C.J. McCollum. Like, they've got all the ingredients. So the only thing they don't have is the experience, particularly as a collective.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I just call them frisky. But, man, I feel like we may be on the precipice of seeing the team that people thought we were going to see a couple of years ago. I know the West is really tough, but I am definitely afraid of them if I or any of these teams in the Western Conference.
George, the West is tough, no doubt. But it feels like, you tell me if I'm wrong, it isn't a year where, like, when everyone knew it's Golden State and everyone's playing for second, or the Lakers, or even Denver. Is there that sizable a gap between, say, Denver and Minnesota and OKC and everybody else in the West?
I think Denver maybe, but only because those five guys that they start and finish the game with are the best group of five guys there are in the league right now. And we started to see this last year with them before they won the championship. And it's funny, I had them a ton last season. So I was kind of pounding the table on all these shows saying, the Denver Nuggets are for real. The Denver Nuggets are for real. And people would just laugh at me like, oh, please, the Denver Nuggets, get out of here. And they were, clearly, for real. And it's because of the way they finished games. And we saw that last year, starting in around Christmas time. They were basically, from Christmas on, they were the best clutch team in the sport. And that's what they are now. You get them in the last 5 minutes of a game, Matt, you better have a big lead against them. Because if you don't, and it's a close game, they are going to run right through you in those last 5 minutes because they execute as well as anyone. So with that said, they're not as deep as they were last year. They don't have the Bruce Browns of the world, et cetera. They're relying on younger guys like Watson, Christian Brown, right? Those guys. Brown got obviously some run last year during the playoffs, but they're not as deep as they were. So can they be had? Perhaps. I don't think they're as inevitable as the Golden State Warriors with Kevin Durant and Steph Curry and all those guys.
Mm-hmm.
But they are really damn good. I don't think there's any question. Anyone else outside of that, I think you can take your chances with in the Western Conference. In any matchup, there would be at least 6 or 7 different iterations of who could end up playing Denver in the Western Conference Finals, and I wouldn't call you crazy on any of them.
Could one of them be New Orleans?
It possibly could. And again, a lot of it is matchup dependent, right? And we all know attrition, right? Injuries obviously play a huge role in this. But, yeah, I can absolutely see a place where the New Orleans Pelicans are playing the Denver Nuggets in the Western Conference Finals. Absolutely.
Jorge Sedano's with us on Twitter, @Sedano. Y'all give him a follow. I want to go, I'm glad you brought up both BI and Z. Let's go a little deeper on Zion. Obviously, look, a huge part of it, George, is the fact that he's healthy and he's playing. But what is the difference for Zion this year that's allowed him to emerge the way that he has in the upper crust in the Western Conference of elite players?
It's the weight loss to me. It's the fact that he trimmed the fat and gained, and looks leaner and meaner. And to me, that's just what we've been asking for a long time. And look, I get it, man. Lower extremity injuries are really tough to deal with. I understand it makes it very difficult to maintain a level of shape, but I feel like there was plenty of criticism that I felt was valid at the time about his conditioning. And for whatever it took now, we are at that place where he is taking it very seriously. And that's what makes them a serious threat to get to the Western Conference Finals, is that he has taken that upon himself, whether it's the criticism, whether he took it upon himself individually, whether someone in his inner circle advised him, hey, man, let's go. You got to do this. Here we are. We are at the right place now, and hopefully Brandon can get healthy and he doesn't miss too much time and he can be healthy as the playoffs start and hopefully get a couple of games before the playoffs start so he can get himself back in rhythm and basketball shape to give them the best chance possible. But they're deep, man. They're also really deep. You look at that roster, there are guys that may not make the playoff rotation because, as we know, it's the old Pat Riley adage, right? Trust 8, play 7. That's kind of the way most coaches think about the playoffs. So I'm curious to see what that looks like with a team that's as deep as New Orleans.
Okay, an obvious question, but to ask it just for the sake of the conversation, how different is the team if BI is absent or limited?
Yeah, that changes the dynamics for sure. Brandon has played so well. And, look, it's funny, we're talking about Zion's weight, right? We should talk about Brandon and what he's done with his body and the transformation he's had over the last several years. And I remember when he was here in L.A., where I live, and I watched him, and I was like, man, he's rail thin. And I never knew if he would get to a point where he would look like he looks now. And he's strong. His shoulders are broad. Like, he looks like an impressive specimen when you look at just his body. And I don't think he'll ever be LeBron, but he doesn't need to be. You know what I mean? He's bigger than Kevin Durant. And we've seen Kevin Durant's frame hold up pretty well for the most part. So to me, though, if he's not healthy, then, yeah, it just changes the math. And they're not one of those teams that I think can get to the Western Conference Final.
Okay, two more things. George Sedano is our guest. One, we all have the conversation here all the time about Herb Jones. The Pels actually have made the header on Twitter, Herb, and the not on Herb block and everything. Why doesn't the national consciousness around the NBA understand how good Herb Jones is defensively? You guys never made NBA all defense, which is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't speak for other people, right? I have watched your team very closely for a number of years. I remember, Zion's rookie year. I practically lived in the region, you know what I mean? Like, I lived, I was in New Orleans all the time.
There was a lot of national people that were that year.
Yeah. So I have, and look, I love your general manager. I would never say I'm in the tank for anyone, but I am a big David Griffin guy. I believe in what he's built. I was a believer even when things looked ice cold for him there at times, that his vision would come to fruition, and it has, I think, to some large extent at this point. But I just think that when you look at those awards, a lot of it is just reputation. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying that my colleagues around the league don't take it seriously, but they are in different spots, right, consistently. And New Orleans is probably not one of them on a regular basis. You know what I mean? Whereas they're watching a lot of Laker games or a lot of Warrior games, or even the Rudy Gobert obviously is someone that's gained a lot of traction because Utah had some real success, right? They were the number 1 seed, even though they failed in the playoffs, but people were watching them and seeing them regularly. I don't think we've gotten there with New Orleans yet. So I think, unfortunately, that confirmation bias kind of plays a little bit of a factor, along with reputation. Because I'll tell you this, people where I live in L.A. are beside themselves that Anthony Davis doesn't get enough love. I know you guys don't love Anthony Davis down there, but
wrong crowd, bro.
No, I know, but they're stunned that he doesn't get enough love for Defensive Player of the Year. And by the way, I talk to the people in Miami all the time, and they're always beside themselves that Bam Adebayo doesn't get any consideration for Defensive Player of the Year. And unfortunately, that's just kind of what it is, man. It's very subjective. It's weird. There's a lot of people voting. There's like 100 and some odd voters, and everybody kind of has a little different criteria. Would I put Herb Jones on an all-defensive team? Yes, I've also seen Herb Jones.
Yeah.
But, David Griffin was telling me about Herb Jones the second he drafted him. So it's a little different perspective for me because I've been following him closely because I trust your general manager with the Pelicans. So I just think it's that. That's a long ways away to go around and just say not everybody sees everyone enough.
I know. That's one of the reasons I'm hoping, aside from the obvious, that this team does make a deep playoff run. Okay, last thing, and your time much appreciated. What would be more improbable? If the Pels make it to the NBA Finals this year or the Heat's run to the Finals last year, team I know you obviously know a lot about?
It's kind of close. I got to be honest,
okay.
Only because the West is really hard. But Miami, it's probably Miami just a little bit because they lost the first play-in game and then had to kind of work from there. Like they were legitimately backs up against the wall. Then they beat Milwaukee, out of the gate in the first round, which I think stunned everybody. I would still say Miami. I think there are people that watch the NBA, particularly amongst the media, that feel like I do, where it's, a number of different iterations could potentially be the teams that would make it to the Western Conference Finals. So, and I think New Orleans, again, with health, could be one of those teams. So I think that there are a number of people that feel that way. I'm not alone on that, is what I would say. So I still think Miami's is more improbable. It was the first also, too, so I think there's some bias there.
Sure.
But I also don't think we're going to see it again for a minute. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't look at the teams here now, even in the West, in the play-in area, and I say to myself, yeah, they can get to the finals. Like, I just don't know if we're going to see that every year like we saw last season.
He's George Sedano. You'll follow him on Twitter at Sedano. Good stuff, man. Thank you so much for the time.
Matt, an absolute pleasure. Happy to come on whenever you guys would like.
We'll do it again soon. Thanks, George.
Take care.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.